6 out of 10 people in Korea say that soaring consumer prices is the most urgent issue facing the country and that the government should prioritize tackling this matter. Recently, the Federation of Korean Industries announced the results of a survey carried out on 1,000 people, where 60.9% of respondents said price stability should take precedence among all policies pursued by the government. This was followed by high-value job creation, housing stability, revitalization of the local economy, and increased support for the underprivileged. Meanwhile, price stability was the top response across all age groups, from those in their 20s to seniors in their 60s and above. Recently, consumer prices have remained around 2%. However, the Federation noted that a large number of people still think prices are high due to a prolonged period of inflation. In fact, prices rose by 4.4% from 2016 to 2020, but jumped by 16.4% from 2020 to April 2025. Regarding the second most urgent issue, high-quality job creation, the top responses were stronger employment support for the youths, women and the elderly, job creation in high-tech and emerging industries, labor market reform and better working conditions, as well as expanding employment in small and medium-sized businesses and startups. For housing stability, the people called for expanding housing supply, stabilizing the real estate market, controlling rising rent prices, and strengthening tenant protection. The poll showed Koreans were all for increasing support for vulnerable, underprivileged groups, expanding housing finance, and providing tax benefits. Lee Sang-ho, head of the Economic and Industrial Division at the Biz Federation, said prolonged high inflation and sluggish economic conditions are worsening the financial burden on households. He also emphasized the need to diversify import sources for agricultural products, improve distribution systems, and strengthen the private sector's capacity to create jobs and boost household income.
The job of the U.S. Armed Forces is not to host drag shows, to transform foreign cultures, but to spread democracy to everybody around the world at the point of a gun. The military's job is to dominate any foe and annihilate any threat to America anywhere, anytime, and any place.
And now to Europe, where the United States and Iran are holding their fifth round of nuclear talks in Rome, aiming to resolve deep-rooted disagreements over Tehran's nuclear program. The talks, which began last month, are the highest-level contact between the two nations since the United States withdrew from the landmark 2015 nuclear accord during President Donald Trump's first term. But ahead of the talks, Iran's foreign minister warned that fundamental differences still remain between the two sides and that there would be no agreement if the United States demands a halt to uranium enrichment.
As they have expressed in their interviews, that they do not believe that any enrichment can continue in Iran, and they think that we should cease all enrichment activities. If that is their goal, there will be no deal. If they want to take away the right of the Iranian people to use nuclear energy peacefully, we will not have an agreement at all.
That hardline message from Iran's foreign minister comes as Tehran pushes for a new deal to lift sanctions that have battered its economy. Ever since returning to office in January, President Donald Trump has reinstated his so-called maximum pressure strategy, which is supporting talks but warning of possible military action if diplomacy fails. In fact, the last round of talks in the Omani capital, Muscat, ended with a public spat over enrichment. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff said Washington could not authorize even 1% enrichment, a position Tehran called a red line, citing its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The spat further led Iran's supreme leader to also cast doubts on the ongoing negotiations earlier this week.
Indirect negotiations existed back then, in his time too. But there were no results, and I don't think we'll bring results now. Who knows? We will not allow Iran to enrich uranium. It's a major overstep. No one is waiting for permission.
Under the 2015 deal, Iran was allowed to enrich uranium at low levels for civilian use. But after the deal was torpedoed in 2018, Tehran currently enriches uranium up to 60%, well above the 3.67% limit set by that accord, but below the 90% needed for a nuclear weapon. Washington is demanding a tougher deal to prevent Tehran from becoming a nuclear power, an ambition that Iran has consistently denied.
And would like to see if we could solve the Iran problem in an intelligent way as opposed to a brutal way. There's only two, intelligent and brutal. Those are the two alternatives.
And adding to the complexity, Iran has issued a stern warning over reports that Israel is preparing to potentially strike its nuclear facilities despite the ongoing U.S.-Iran talks. Israel has repeatedly threatened military action, but after this week, a new report claimed Tel Aviv was allegedly actively planning an attack, although no final decision has in fact been taken. In a letter to the United Nations, Iran's foreign minister declared that any such strike would be met with a decisive response and that the United States would be held responsible if complicit.
We believe that in the event of any attack on the nuclear facilities of the Islamic Republic of Iran by the Zionist regime, the U.S. government will also be involved and bear legal responsibility. Iran strongly warns against any adventurism by the Zionist regime and will respond decisively to any threat or unlawful act by this regime.
So with Iran refusing to halt enrichment and threatening retaliation over any strike on its nuclear sites, tensions remain high and a breakthrough looks as uncertain as ever.
In October 1986, 2 years into my service at CBN News, I reported on President Ronald Reagan's summit with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik, Iceland. The summit ended abruptly when President Reagan leaned over the negotiation table and told Gorbachev, "Niet," meaning no. In exchange for reducing arms, Gorbachev demanded that Reagan abandon his plans for the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as Star Wars. SDI was Reagan's vision for a space-based missile defense system. He asserted that Gorbachev was holding all nuclear arms agreements with the United States hostage to the SDI, something President Reagan was unwilling to concede.
I pledged to the American people that there was no way that I would give away SDI. Strategic defense is the key to making arms reduction work. It protects us against the possibility that at some point, when the elimination of ballistic missiles is not yet complete, that the Soviets may change their minds.
Fast forward 39 years later, Donald Trump is committed to realizing Ronald Reagan's vision for homeland security. He's proposing to invest $175 billion in a missile defense system called the Golden Dome. The system would be similar to Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, but with the added feature of being space-based.
The president said this is the first West Point class of the golden era of America, the golden age of America, he said. Let's get reaction now from the former head of the U.S. military's Missile Defense Agency, Vice Admiral James Searing. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your distinguished service as well this Memorial Day weekend. I couldn't think of anyone better to have now. Just given everything that the president just said, what was your reaction? What is your top line reaction to the president's speech on this powerful day?
It was great to be with you, Brian. It was very positive. The West Point cadets, as all officers entering the military this year, are coming in a much different era in terms of the ramp up of defense spending and, frankly, the threat that this country faces. You just saw the best and brightest that we have in this country, future leaders of the military, and, frankly, future leaders of this country graduating, and many of them will go into harm's way, and many of them will operate the systems that the president has put into his budget.
Now, there has been an uptick, a big uptick in recruitment in the U.S. military, particularly in the U.S. Army. Now, analysts have pointed out that upward trajectory was starting a little bit last year in 2024, but there's no doubt about it. The president really talked about how he believes his administration, he called it the spirit that his administration has kind of reignited in people, has a lot to do with recruitment records this year. So let's listen to the president, what he said about that. I'll get your reaction.
We just set a brand new peacetime recruiting record. The most people joined, and we are brimming. In fact, be careful. There's somebody going to try and take your job. Be careful. You better be good. We are brimming with confidence, and we're brimming with people. We had the best recruiting month that we've had in memory. Nobody remembers anything like it. And that's all because they have spirit now. They have spirit. They have a spirit for our country.
Vice Admiral, what do you make of that?
I think what you're hearing is in terms of the recruitment numbers and what we're seeing, Brian, is people that hear the president's message loud and clear, understand where the Defense Department and DOD and the services need to be in terms of warfighting ethos, lethality, and winning. And I think that rallies the young men and women who join the military.
And now I have to ask you about the Golden Dome missile defense system. This is your expertise. What do you make of the Golden Dome? Is it feasible? And how important is it to the defense of this country?
Yes, it's feasible, and it's critically important to the future defense of this country. I thought that the announcement this week was one of the most consequential announcements that we've had in 40 plus years since when President Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative. Nothing has been rolled out in terms of a policy of that magnitude since then. And I liken it to days of Admiral Rickover in the nuclear Navy post-World War II in terms of how fast that happened in terms of putting Nautilus to sea in 1954. So it's on the order of magnitude of those types of announcements. The criticality of the system and the build out of the system is crucial in terms of transitioning the technology to encompass all of the threats today. We certainly have a threat capability against ICBMs against North Korea and Iran today, but the president in his executive order had talked about protection against all ICBMs, including China and Russia, and that will necessitate a space-based interceptor capability.
Wow. Well, that is a powerful endorsement from somebody who knows a little bit something about missile defense. Retired Vice Admiral. Thank you, James Searing. Thank you so much for being here with me this Memorial Day weekend and for your service.
I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect our homeland from the threat of foreign missile attack. And that's what we're doing. This design for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term.
Some Democrats on Capitol Hill argue with the national debt projected to approach $40 trillion, the country cannot afford the expense. However, as the threat of nuclear missiles from North Korea, China, Russia, and possibly even Iran increases, the United States cannot afford to be without it.
I believe I remember telling Tony, live and otherwise, that what we needed was a pseudo-armor around the world. Remember that? Whether it impacted our precious freedoms or not. That's what we needed.
Well, that didn't work out, did it?
I said we'd lose. You said, we'll do that together too. And guess what, Cap? We lost.
The White House is taking its first steps in easing sanctions on Syria. The Treasury Department today says it is granting Syria a waiver on one set of sanctions and easing other restrictions imposed on companies with business in Syria. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the relief is meant to encourage new investments and to help the country's interim government recovery following 13 years of civil war. Trump announced the relief during his trip to Saudi Arabia last week.
Now, and US President Donald Trump, he has told military graduates they are the first to serve in a golden age of America.
Let's go live now to US correspondent Jonathan Kersley. Jono, he's vowed to crush America's enemies.
He has. He didn't specify exactly who America's enemies are or their adversaries that he says that these military officers in the future will be crushing and killing. Donald Trump was addressing the graduates at the very prestigious West Point Military Academy today in front of 1,000 or so graduates he said would go on to lead the most powerful military in the world. He also hit out at what he referred to as diversity, equality and inclusion measures. Here's some of what he had to say.
The job of the U.S. Armed Forces is not to host drag shows, to transform foreign cultures, but to spread democracy to everybody around the world at the point of a gun. The military's job is to dominate any foe and annihilate any threat to America anywhere, anytime, and any place.
President Trump also touted $1 trillion in defence spending as he also tries to focus on diplomatic efforts to end wars between Russia and Ukraine and in Gaza as well.
Good on you, Jono. Thank you so much.